acknowledging the families who have come here today to be with us. Your courage, resilience, and advocacy for rare disease research and public policy gives purpose to everything we do. So we are honored to have you here today. I would like to recognize President Richard McCullough and First Lady Jayavarthikar for their steadfast support of our work, and to thank Representative Adam Anderson for his leadership and partnership. I'm also pleased to welcome Vice President for Research, Dr. Stacy Patterson, and I did see our Vice President and Clinical Operations Officer, Jeremy Slaga, who just recently joined us, and our other FSU and College of Medicine leaders. We are equally grateful to our corporate partners. Many of you are here. That display is out in the atrium. Your support and your partnership accelerates our growth. Thank you. The Florida Institute for Pediatric Rare Diseases was established February 2024, formally, 2 years ago. Thanks to Representative Anderson's leadership, we secured a generous appropriation from the Florida legislature and unwavering support from FSU leadership. From the very outset, our goal was to build an institute focused broadly on rare diseases, on discovering innovative approaches for the diagnosis and treatment of rare diseases, and building a workforce to train skilled healthcare professionals, and also to help shape public policy that benefits every child, every family in Florida. In just 2 years, we have worked with urgency, with diligence, with dedication, I hope you'll agree, to build a comprehensive and integrated model with a singular focus on improving the lives of children and families in Florida and across the nation. These 2 years have seen the establishment of 6 new programs at the Institute. Rare diseases may be individually uncommon, but together they affect millions of people, families, and children. Therefore, our responsibility has always been and will always be to ensure that scientific innovation translates into faster answers, better care, and real hope. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your partnership, and it's now my pleasure to welcome Dean Alma Littles to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Bidet. Good morning. It is truly a privilege to welcome you to the College of Medicine for Rare Diseases Day. Rare diseases test the very foundations of our healthcare system. They require coordination across disciplines, sustained scientific investment, and public policy that keeps pace with innovation. At Florida State University and through FSU Health, we are committed to building an integrated model that connects research, clinical care, education, and community partnerships that serve children and families. The Florida Institute for Pediatric Rare Diseases represents that commitment in action. In just 2 years, IPRD has strengthened our clinical infrastructure, expanded genomic diagnostics, launched a new master's degree program in genetic counseling, and accelerated research focused on precision therapies. This work prepares the next generation of clinicians and researchers while delivering real impact to families. None of this progress happens alone. We are grateful for our legislative partners, our clinical collaborators, and our corporate partners who share in this vision and invest in advancing innovation for rare disease patients. Representative Adam Anderson exemplifies the kind of public leadership that makes this possible. Through his work on the Sunshine Genetics Act, Florida has become the first state in the nation to support newborn genomic screening at this level. His leadership demonstrates how thoughtful legislation can accelerate scientific progress and improve lives. Representative Anderson, thank you so much for your partnership and your advocacy. It is now my honor to invite you to come share your remarks.
Well, it's challenging for me to hear people much smarter than me talk about the success that ideas have had. So thank you, Dean Littles, for those very kind words. It's always so satisfying for me to be back here at Florida State with my fellow Knowles, and no matter what the occasion is, it's always exciting here to be on campus. But today we're gathered here to acknowledge Rare Disease Day and acknowledge the 30 million Americans that are affected by rare diseases and create more awareness for the almost 10,000 rare diseases that exist. As I stand here, though, I can't help but to just think about how remarkable the progress has been at the Florida Institute for Pediatric Rare Diseases at FSU. And it's hard to imagine that it was hardly 3 years ago that this institute was an idea and a handshake between me and President McCullough. Some of you have heard the story of how that really came about. I'm not going to go into the details on that today because I'm told I only have 4 minutes, and that's going to be hard enough for me, so I won't do that. But today, this institute is so rapidly growing. We have over 20 dedicated employees. There are over a dozen fully funded, unique research initiatives. There's multidiscipline, multi-university collaborations, the CLIA lab that we're celebrating today, the viral vector core, the gene editing core, and what will soon be the largest genetic counselors master's program in the state of Florida. So thank you for that. But I think what I'm most excited about is the future of this institute. And the next big step for this institute is rolling out the first of its kind undiagnosed rare disease clinical health center for pediatrics. So this collaboration with Tallahassee Memorial Hospital and FSU Health is truly going to be transformative. We've talked about transformation a lot in healthcare between myself and the leaders here at Florida State. This is truly what is going to move the needle when it comes to world-class healthcare here in the Panhandle. So thank you, President McCullough, for your leadership there. It's become clear to me that if you have not already, you will soon run out of space for the Florida Institute for Pediatric Rare Diseases, and I'm excited about that problem. I'm excited to work with you to help solve that. I want to take a minute, though, to just speak directly to the families that are here, the families that have children that are affected by rare diseases. I know personally how hard it is to travel with a medically fragile child. I know personally how difficult it can be just to be in a new environment. So thank you for making the trip. Thank you for making the sacrifice to be here. I know some folks flew in here from DC because there's Rare Disease Days events going on in DC, and your advocacy really matters federally, and it matters here in the state of Florida as well. So please, from the bottom of my heart, I ask you to just be present wherever you can advocate. You being here today gives the dedicated folks at the IPRD, the leadership at the university, my fellow lawmakers, it gives us a new sense of why we are doing what we're doing. Don't stop fighting for our children. I know how hard it is. I know how uncomfortable it can be. I know that it can hurt. And I know that you don't want to have to advocate for your children. But I want you to know that your voice is being heard. We hear it in this room. We hear it not just within the rare disease communities that you're closest to. We hear it around the state. And for the first time in a long time, your voice is being heard nationally. We have movement across the country, new conditions getting added to RUSP. For the first time, we have national media voices in our corner. We have top universities around the state and around the country collaborating. We even have international participation in the Sunshine Genetics newborn screening program, something I could have never imagined would happen. Gene therapies are working, and even more of those therapies are showing promise. Real change is truly on the horizon. That change is not only for you, that change is because of you, and that change is because of families like ours. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity on the House floor to present a resolution recognizing tomorrow, February 28th, Rare Disease Day, and I would like to invite President McCullough up to join me to present that exact resolution. Want to pop in front? Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for the idea. Thank you for your leadership in advancing genetic screening in Florida. Your commitment, your son Drew's legacy are already making differences for families across our state. You know, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here for Rare Disease Day 2026. It's wonderful to be here with so many interesting and fantastic people, scientists, clinicians, industry partners, policymakers who are helping to move this work forward. You know, the leadership of Representative Anderson, his wife Brianne, daughter Kaylee, it's just incredible. And as he said, this essentially began as his vision to say that we want to have an institute for pediatric rare diseases at Florida State University. As he tells the story, he came in with his 50 slides to present to me this idea. He got about 4 or 5 slides in, and I said, let's do it. Let's do it. You know, we have to have some funding so that we can, you know, get it off the ground, but we're all in, and we'll do it. And it's just amazing to see what it's turned into, that we've been able to attract the best and brightest people from across the state, new professors to be here. I mean, you know, it was a perfect alignment, crystallization, essentially, of a vision that I had for Florida State to do work in genomics and do high-throughput screening in the area of genomics, and thinking about identifying mutations and genetic rare diseases, both rare and common, and thinking about how we might work in that area to bring together, you know, the data science and AI to develop, you know, diagnostics and eventually precision medicine to help to cure some of these diseases. And it's an area that I knew a lot about, and we're really, I'm really looking forward to Dr. Green's lecture today. He's here from Illumina. I was in, First Lady and I were in Boston for 10 years, and you know, it's pretty hard not to be in Boston and not know about Illumina. You know, I have, and science is a very small community. Tony Zarnick is a good friend of mine. He worked for Ron Breslow at Columbia. I was a postdoc with Breslow, so we've been friends for many, many years. He was at Ohio State as a professor and started Illumina. David Walt. David Walt I know well because I was on the board of the Wyss Institute when I was at Harvard, and I got to know David and the visionary things that came out of that completely transformed the world. And so it's really, it's going to be very wonderful for the audience to be able to hear the things that Dr. Green is bringing to bear with this. His background as being part of the Human Genome Project is, you know, in some ways the beginning of how all of this came together. The idea that you could, you know, sequence the entire human genome just sound like an insanity, just an absolute insanity. And But you can go to companies and pay $99 and get your whole human genome sequenced for less than $100, I'm sure, because they got to make a little bit of money, right? And identify genetic markers. It's just, it's unfathomable to think about that. And then the hope that comes with gene editing, that you could actually cure people that have mutations. And we've already seen some of that already occur in, N equals 1 patients, and singular patients that have been cured from genetic diseases. So hope is on the horizon, and we're so proud to be a part of that with the leadership of Florida Legislature and Adam, Dean Alma Littles, Dr. Bidet. It really is something that is an unbelievable goal that we have to be a part of. But one of the reasons it's so important is because this is about rare diseases, and rare diseases are often orphan diseases. Pharmaceutical companies don't necessarily look at small populations of patients to look to cure them. Not that they're evil, but they have a business to run and make money. So long, hard problems, that's what we do in academics. And so, we're really proud to be a part of that, to think about what small impact that we can make. One of the most remarkable things about this initiative, though, I think, is that what came out as a kernel of an idea and had humble beginnings has attracted the attention from scientists from around the United States and the world that are interested in either partnering with or coming here to be a part of our initiative. And it's created tremendous excitement. And we're just really delighted to do that. I remember, I have a little bit of an interesting story. About 4 years ago, it was a university that was talking about creating a master's program in genetic counseling. And I remember I leaned over to the provost at the time and I said, how can you create a master's degree in genetic counseling? I mean, you can't even, this stuff is like, nobody even knows what to do with the data. How can you have a master's degree in genetic counseling? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Well, we've launched a master's program in genetic counseling, and our first students begin in the fall. So, it just shows you how unintelligent I am about what's going on in the world. And we're really thrilled to have Dr. Ashley Cannon, who's an inaugural director of our program, and she'll begin on Monday, and we're delighted to welcome her to FSU. Oh, where is she? Could you please stand up? Welcome. We also recently opened a whole genome clinical testing lab that will help to deliver new accurate diagnosis for children with rare and undiagnosed conditions. The Institute, as it was mentioned, already has 10 projects in pediatric rare diseases, brain tumors, diabetes, Tay-Sachs disease. Each one of these has the opportunity to make an impact on and a chance to hopefully improve children's lives. Helping families to deliver answers sooner, giving doctors better tools to deliver some piece of certainty where there's uncertainty most of the time is part of the goal. We're so proud to partner with Quest Diagnostics. We have Sarah South, the Executive Scientific Director, who will join our keynote speaker, Dr. Green, and me for today's roundtable discussion. And we all know Quest Diagnostics. I have my blood drawn there very often, get almost all my testing done. We have one on campus. So obviously, the leader in diagnostic services, we're wonderful that we're partnering with them. I want to recognize also Dr. David Ledbetter, the Associate Director of Precision Medicine at the Institute for Pediatric Rare Diseases. We're really great that you're here at Florida State University. He will moderate the roundtable after the keynote. And we really appreciate that you got Dr. Green to come here. Dr. Green said that He got an invitation from Dr. Ledbetter and agreed to it, and then got 6 more invitations right after that, but had already committed to us, so thank you for sticking with us. Serving as director from 2009 to 2025. That's a long time. Under his leadership, genomics became a central pillar of modern medicine and public health. As a pioneer, has made a difference in the world and in science and in precision medicine. He played an integral role, as I mentioned, in the Human Genome Project, which identified 25,000 human genes and transformed medicine, biology, biotechnology. He has MD and PhD from Washington University of St. Louis. He's authored hundreds of publications, and in 2023 was elected to the most prestigious National Academy of Medicine. Congratulations about that. We're honored to have him today. Please join me in welcoming my keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Green.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I am indeed delighted to be here today, and despite other Rare Disease Day events, there we go, this was the place I was going to be, because this is the epicenter of activities and progress in rare disease work because of the efforts that you've already heard described, and I'll have a few more things to say about it. What I wanted to do today is to tell a story. I wanted to contextualize everything about Rare Disease Day and the things that are going on here in Florida around a broader narrative, a narrative I've been involved in from the very beginning. It is this journey, if you will, from the Genome Project to the implementation of genomic medicine. This is going to be a scientific story, it's a medical story, but it's also very deeply a societal story as well. Now, you heard in the introduction, I'm on a professional journey of my own. I was involved in the Human Genome Project from the very beginning, but then a couple years into the Genome Project, a few years in, I was recruited to the National Human Genome Research Institute, where David Ledbetter was my first supervisor. I was at the Institute for over 30 years, eventually becoming the director, as you heard. And just about a year ago, about 11 months ago, I retired from federal service. Just literally 4 weeks ago, this is me on day one walking into Illumina, literally 4 weeks ago-ish, or my 20th day at Illumina, I am now the chief medical officer, and it is an example where one door closes, another one opens. This is my first public talk as the Illumina chief medical officer, and I've learned I have to show a slide like this, so there is a disclosure. I am an employee of Illumina, and I do hold equity in the company, but otherwise it's just the same old Eric Green that's been around for decades telling stories about the Human Genome Project. So here's the story. There basically are 2 interrelated scientific fields that were actually launched last century that I think are changing medicine this century and really are what's everything relevant about today's discussion. And by the way, some of this is an educational thing and a walk down memory lane and just an understanding of where did all this come from? Well, first there was the creation of this new field of genetics in the early 1900s, the study of inheritance, without much of a knowledge of what the hereditary molecule was. That came later in the century. And then at the midpoint of the century came the elucidation of that iconic structure, the double helical structure of DNA that gave the key piece of the puzzle, how it was the information molecule. And then from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s came a tremendous amount of progress in learning how to study DNA, manipulate DNA, eventually read DNA's letters, leading to the creation of a new word, genomics, and the creation of a new field called genomics in 1987. And this is the first time the word genomics was put into the scientific or medical press. I will point out, I graduated with my MD PhD in 1987, meaning never once in medical school or graduate school did I hear the word genomics, because the word didn't exist. But such it is, here I am, and genomics has thrived ever since its inception. Now, how did we get to this thing called the Human Genome Project? Well, these tools got so good in the 60s, 70s, and particularly the 80s to manipulate DNA and study it, that there started to be a drumbeat of discussion about the idea of an audacious international project. There was a meeting in 1984 where this idea was first kicked around. A famous cancer researcher said, if we're ever going to understand cancer, we've got to sequence the human genome. The field got created, as I showed you in that paper in 1987, and then politicians got involved in a very positive way, just like Representative Anderson got involved. And that was catalyzed by two important scientific reports that were put together by organizations that the government asked to go out and learn about areas and bring it to members of the U.S. Congress, such that by 1989 was the key congressional hearing where Congress said, should we do this thing called the Human Genome Project? And they got a resounding yes. And so 1989 was a truly pivotal year, I think, in the history of humankind. Because really, in 1989, just things changed forever in so many ways. I mean, first of all, Taylor Swift was born, so we just have to appreciate that 89 was a big deal year. But even more important for the discussion today, 1989, you know, we were just getting ready to launch the Human Genome Project. And so 89 will be remembered, and I remember it well. We were just getting ready for that 1990 launch of the Human Genome Project, and we did launch it in October 1990. And what was the Genome Project at its core? Well, it was about reading our blueprint for the very first time, figuring out the order of the roughly 3 billion letters that are one representation of the human genome. Well, I'd love to give you the hour story of the Human Genome Project, but I can't do that other than to say it was audacious, it was ambitious, it was scary, it was exhilarating, it was everything you could possibly imagine, but most importantly, it was successful. And at the end of the day, by April of 2003, the Human Genome Project was declared completed. We had great celebrations. We had just read the human genome sequence for the very first time, and there we had, if you will, it available for us to read and to interpret and to do everything that has followed over the last 23 years. But I should point out that while we did celebrate, and there were some good parties, we also appreciated that when the Genome Project ended, it was really not the end of things. It was really just as much a starting line as a finishing line. And we knew that everything was going to now start because we finally had in front of us a reference sequence of the human genome. And so a lot sort of happened with all the participants of the Human Genome Project, because the groups that got together around the world, they had different reasons for being there. But I represented, especially being at the National Institutes of Health and trained as a physician scientist, I represented the group that said, we've got to figure out how we're going to use this new genomic information, the new genomic tools, to apply this to change the practice of medicine. And we did it because everything I remembered and learned in medical school was based on the average patient. What we know that no patient is average. Each of us is unique. Each of our patients is unique. And so the idea was, can you use genomics to actually tailor medical care to make it more precise, more individualized, more personalized, and so forth. This was not that creative of an idea because the press already saw it coming. When the Genome Project ended, whether you looked at the New York Times, the public press, or the scientific press like Science Magazine, they were juxtaposing the two words, genomic and medicine, and they said, we're going to do it. We're going to now implement genomic medicine. There was only a slight problem 23 years ago, is that we could spell genomic medicine, but it was a very blurry concept. We needed to figure out how we were going to actually get there for individual patients. We could define it, and we did define it. We recognized that it was all about getting genomic information about an individual patient and using those set of spelling differences in our blueprint, in our DNA that each patient has, somehow figuring out what is relevant for their health, what might be consequential in terms of what diseases, and other uses of genomic information for prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. And so we had a pivot. That was the new starting line. What was our finish line is now our starting line, and we saw in the distance, we knew it was going to take longer than 13 years, would be the realization of genomic medicine. And we knew it was going to be a multi-step journey. We knew it was going to take a long time, and we didn't even know all the steps. It felt a lot like the Genome Project, where we knew we had to get going. We didn't know all the steps. And like the Genome Project, but even bigger than the Genome Project, this was not going to be done by one scientist, one institution, one funding agency, one country, one discipline. And it was not going to be a sprint, even more so than the Genome Project, because we were going to have to get this into medical care. This was going to be a marathon. And this was going to involve a lot of people running shoulder to shoulder, really trying to figure out all the ways to think about using genomic information to improve the practice of medicine. So how do you do that? Well, I'll just tell you, I mean, I had, again, 30 years in federal government leading genomics research and now 4 weeks in the private sector. But while I was in the federal service, what we did was learn how to sort of strategically create visions for what needed to be done. That's how we did it in the Genome Project. And in my 3 decades, or the 23 years since the end of the Human Genome Project, we laid out for the community, and some of you participated in strategic planning processes that helped produce these blueprints, if you will, in 2003 and 2011 and in 2020 that outlined basically a roadmap for what are the steps that were going to be needed to go from that first human genome sequence to the realization of genomic medicine. So again, I need to keep my remarks fairly brief, so I'm not going to, these are the highlights of 23 years condensed to like a minute, and you could just read them, but these are the seismic advances that have taken place. The first one is probably the most important on there. We now sequence the human genome for well under $1,000, when that first human genome sequence cost about $1 billion. $1,000 or $500 or $300, now we're talking. That's a diagnostic test. I'm trained as a pathologist. I know the cost of a diagnostic test. That's very reasonable. But we've also learned a lot about how all of our DNA is different from each other and what those differences might mean. We now know a lot about the human genes and other functional elements in the human genome. We are learning increasingly about the genomic basis of human disease, including rare disease. That's what I'll amplify on in a minute. And finally, we are beginning to see the use of genomic information be used in medicine, the realization of genomic medicine. Why is it? What's come on the scene over the last 8 years or so? Well, in a very oversimplified way, we can now routinely and inexpensively sequence somebody's genome, compare it to a reference sequence, and make a list of all the spelling differences, the genomic variants. Oh, and then we go off and we implement genomic medicine. Now, the genetic counselors and any medical geneticists in the audience immediately look at the slide and they say, slick slide. However, it is a profound oversimplification, and I acknowledge that. But it does work well in some situations already, and it will get better every single day forever. It's going to get better and better and better. And as a result of this ability to begin to do this in reality for individual patients, we now have examples where genomic medicine is here and now. So these are the 5 areas I typically give talks about: cancer genomics, rare genetic disease diagnostic, non-invasive prenatal genomic testing, pharmacogenomics, and genomics-based prevention. Each of these could be a symposium in and of themselves, recognizing it's Rare Disease Day here, and realizing what the focus of today's symposium is. I'm just going to talk about rare genetic disease diagnostics. And to further contextualize why we're at such an exciting point in history, I want to take you back to day 1 of the Human Genome Project. So you've already heard the quote, and it'll come up other times. We think there's something like 10,000 rare genetic diseases that exist and something like 30 million people in the United States affected by them. But let's go back in time. Of those 10,000 rare genetic diseases, on the day the Human Genome Project started, 1990, how many of those 10,000 did we know what the gene was in the genome that was mutated? The answer is 61. Here are several examples. Actually, cystic fibrosis got in under the wire by a few months. 61. What's that number today? Because of all the remarkable advances in that slide I didn't have time to talk about, in terms of being able to just rip through and be able to study as much as we can about individuals with rare genetic diseases. In actually, I need to change that slide. It's now 2026. And guess what? It's over 6,000. Over 6,000. We still have more to go. We've got to get up to 10,000 or so. But that is remarkable, remarkable progress from 1990 to 2025. And that has just been game-changing for this community. And what it now means is it's now becoming standard. I mean, the idea is if a patient comes in with a cardiac defect or developmental delay, you're going to do a diagnostic workup, but it hopefully shouldn't be an odyssey because you're going to quickly get some blood drawn, you're going to quickly send it to the lab, you're going to quickly get a genome sequence, and while you won't always get an answer, you often will. And this is now becoming mainstream. I mean, tens of thousands of times every year here in the US, and even more so around, if you add up everything around the world, probably hundreds of thousands of times, this routine is now pursued. And it works. And there's the huge literature accumulating. This particular review article from a couple years ago talked about it yields a diagnosis something like 30 to 50% of the time. But the good news is we will get better at this. Every year we'll understand the genome better, we'll understand how variation in the genome can result in rare disease. So whatever any of this is right now, it's baseline. It's only going to get better in terms of diagnostic successes. And it's really gratifying that it's become so mainstream they write review articles now about implementation of diagnostics for rare genetic diseases. This is totally mainstream in many situations. And what it is, of course, doing is helping so many areas of medicine where rare diseases have an influence. The diagnostic odysseys that often get talked about and shown here is a program that started at the NIH and is now essentially worldwide. And I know you're going to set up a program here that's going to focus on undiagnosed conditions. Genomics helps these diagnostic odysseys tremendously in terms of being a key tool now to try to end those diagnostic odysseys. And then there's sub-stories within these, because sometimes the diagnostic odyssey might only be a day, because it might end up being a newborn that just comes into the world and something is not right with that newborn. The neonatologists desperately want to know what is wrong. We can't figure it out. They're doing everything they can, but now through work of the genomics community, you can rapidly get a genome sequence. You can, in many cases, be able to actually find out what is wrong with that child, change the management, and save that baby's life, or at least better manage whatever condition that sick individual, that infant who is ill might be suffering from. And the good news is the uptake of this has been in the neonatal intensive care unit, increasingly in the pediatric intensive care unit, in other intensive care units in the pediatric period. And there's studies that are showing how effective this is. I'll just show you a study, a review article. I love it when genomics has review articles because it means there's enough literature to actually review because we're making such progress. And they talk about, and this is a study from the UK, but looked at all the literature, significant reduction in costs of these children because you get them out of the NICU sooner into specialty care, a significant fraction of them getting a diagnosis, and overall one could imagine this now becoming a frontier standard tool within neonatal intensive care units. And so that's really exhilarating that this is something, and I know it's a priority as part of the many things going on here in Florida as an exemplar. I'll also show you that don't just think it's restricted to the pediatric era, because I thought this was a very interesting study that just came out at the end of last year where they said, what about adults who end up in an intensive care unit? Especially if we take out those who are in the intensive care unit. Let's exclude those that were there because of a trauma or because of a poisoning or a known condition like cancer. What about just people that are fragile and whatever reason they're in an intensive care unit? Guess what? When they looked at their genome sequences, they found that 1/4 of them had undiagnosed rare genetic disorders. So there's a lot of rare diseases that are having effects on individuals we don't even know about because they remain undiagnosed. We don't think to look there. I think what this means is that rare disease diagnostics is becoming increasingly relevant across the lifespan. I told you about the routine use of this. I introduced you to the idea of rapid genome sequencing for acutely ill newborns. I didn't really have time to tell you about reproductive genetic carrier screening, but of course that makes tremendous amount of sense once you gain knowledge about who might be a carrier for a rare disease. And in a few minutes, I'm going to tell you about routine newborn screening because that's where I'm heading. So hold off on that now. So this takes us to the present time, in essence. And what I would tell you is that in 23 years, we've done this remarkable pivot, having the most blurry concept of what genomic medicine might be, but everybody knew was the place to go, to now bringing it into focus. It's just the tip of the spear, the tip of the iceberg, whatever metaphor you want. There's so much more exciting things that will happen in genomic medicine, but there's enough examples now to convince people this is it. We can really do this, and now we've just got to expand our repertoire of opportunities to use genomics in medicine. So the question that I'm probably most commonly asked, both when I was the NHGRI director, and I can tell you even in my first 4 weeks of being the Illumina chief medical officer is, yeah, but what's the next big thing? I want to know what's coming up next. What do I see as sort of the next big thing to look for? And I got to tell you, Florida has insights about this because it ends up being a seismic expansion of an established thing. Well, what's that established thing? Well, I should remind you, and many of you do know, there is a 60-year history of screening newborns for genetic disorders. And you could read here some bullet areas for those who don't really know of the details, but I bet many of you do. But, you know, in about a day or two, a typical child, my 2 children, for example, even when they were born, you know, a mean nurse comes in and then, you know, cleans off their heel and then sticks a needle in their heel and grabs some blood. And that blood gets put on a piece of filter paper called a Guthrie card, and that's coming up in a second. And that Guthrie card has that dried blood spot, and it goes off to a state lab, and it gets screened for some number of genetic disorders. I think in Florida, if I looked it up right, it's about 60 right now. I think in Maryland, where I have one at my house of many years, it's a little higher in Maryland. Every state does it a little different. In Georgia, where I spend a lot of my time now, that's a little less than 60, but it's something like that. But it's only 60, 70, 40, 50. But we know the genomic basis of 6,000 rare diseases, and we should be thinking bolder. And we've been thinking about this idea of doing genome sequencing of all newborns, even going back to the Genome Project days. Wouldn't it be wonderful if one day every baby's genome was sequenced? We thought about that. That actually started even before there were electronic health records. But now we have electronic health records. So it gets more serious attention over the last 23 years. And, you know, we can do it. We have all the infrastructure. We just have to then take those blood spots and just use them to extract DNA and sequence the child's genome, put it in their electronic medical record, and have that information available to them.
Effort to get here and present his presentation. When I first called him, it was fortuitous that he was going to be in Orlando for the Advances in Genome Biology and Technology meeting, a meeting he helped found and has supported for 20-plus years, and where he received yet another award, the Distinguished Service Award from LGBT at the opening of the meeting this week. But he had a dinner last night and couldn't travel until early this morning, so he got up at 3:45 this morning to get into a car service to make it here in time to join us this morning.
Thank you for arranging. There was not bad traffic this morning. I'm sure you had a lot to do with that. That helped.
Glad we can get that done.
So I'm sure you were impressed with his energy and enthusiasm in his presentation, but now that you know he started his day at 3:45, it's even more impressive he was able to do that. Second, I want to thank the FSU Board of Trustees for their wise decision to extend our president's contract for another 3 years this week. And congratulate and thank our President McCullough for making it such an easy decision for the Board of Trustees to do that. So thank you. So I'd like to sort of frame the overall theme of the panel discussion in the context of sort of unique opportunities for the state of Florida, for FSU and FSU Health in genomic medicine, precision medicine. I think we have some advantages. We're the 3rd largest state by population. We're a pro-business state. And we have strong legislative support, as you've all heard and are aware of, with Representative Anderson and others, particularly in pediatric genomics and rare diseases. And so I'd like to start there and ask Representative Anderson, as a businessman with a particular interest, to comment. My understanding, and I've only been back in Florida, I'm originally from Florida, just returned a few years ago, just came to FSU 1 year ago, so I'm relatively new. My understanding is, for example, that biotech industry, medical industry is pretty good, more in the medical device side. What might doing a novel project at a statewide level do to induce business interest in Florida, including partnerships, but also even relocating and building more biotech industry within the state?
Well, thanks for giving me the easy question first, David. Appreciate that. There is a tremendous opportunity economically for the state of Florida, or truthfully any state that gets behind an initiative like the Sunshine Genetics Act. And there are other states looking to follow us. You had mentioned it in your presentation, Dr. Green. That's no exaggeration. We get calls in my office on a regular basis from lawmakers in other parts of the country that are, I think, a little threatened, but they tell me they're excited. Either way, I'll take it. Just the manufacturing of gene therapies alone is a $100 billion industry by 2033. Just the manufacturing. And Florida is pretty well equipped to take that business in and to grow it. So we always talk about this mecca of the biotech industry is up in Boston and Cambridge area, and that's true. There's some phenomenal universities there that support it. They have a very different business climate in that state, and I don't think anyone in Florida wants to be the next Massachusetts, nor will we let that happen. But we can support these businesses in other ways, and one way is by supporting our universities appropriately, and that's exactly what we're doing here at Florida State and other universities throughout the state as well. The interesting thing is that while Boston and Cambridge is that mecca, the CEOs of these companies live in Florida. And they live in Florida because of our business climate and because of our tax environment. So we're already having conversations with some of those individuals about bringing those operations here to the state. And that's not just in biotech, but that's throughout the pharma industry. But I think immediately the next opportunity, the easiest one, the path of least resistance, is to start bringing the manufacturing of these cutting-edge treatments here to the Sunshine State.
Yeah, the other follow-on to that is in our planning discussions for what Florida's genomic newborn screening project is going to look like and what genes and conditions are we going to screen for. Because current 60, most of the current pilot projects are 400 plus or minus genes, conditions. Beacons is now 750. At our inaugural steering committee meeting in Tampa, Representative Anderson said, I think Florida's gene condition list should be the biggest of anybody's. And of course, all the academic nerd scientists, conservatives like myself said, well, I'm not sure we want to be the biggest, but we want to be the best. And as we discussed it, particularly with our patient advocates and advocacy groups, most of newborn screening is very conservative, where there are FDA-approved drugs available that we know have to be initiated very early in life. But then the other families say, well, what about the conditions where there are currently clinical trials going on, but it's not FDA approved yet? We don't want to be left out. And then the other families say, well, what about the pharma companies are doing R&D and they have a pipeline of drugs that are not yet in clinical trials? We don't want to be left out 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. So the current sense of our group is to be much more broadly focused on things that we think will be treatable. There's strong interest, R&D activity on the part of biopharma, and I should have acknowledged 3 of our sponsors for this conference today, Ultragenyx, Sarepta, and BioMarin, are here and have tables outside, represent the rare disease biopharma community, where Florida could be the largest clinical trial-ready cohort for every rare genetic disease in the United States. And that's a pretty cool notion, that we could be the epicenter, as I think Eric used, for clinical trials for rare disease, because we're going to find them all at birth. And that's really important. So Adam, any follow-on comments?
Well, as a business guy, I've been in business my whole life, and you look for opportunities to grow your business, right, at every angle. And if I was running a biotech company that had a clinical trial or an FDA-approved treatment for a rare disease, and there was one state in the country that was diagnosing and screening those babies at birth, that would be the only state I would be focused on. So I think that's a very natural progression. Absolutely, absolutely. Why would you not be doing business in the state of Florida?
And Eric, I know you've only been at Illumina for a few weeks, but you're aware of the other newborn sequencing projects. And in my experience, which is quite a number of decades now. It's the first time I've seen the diagnostic community partner, participate, and financially support early-stage clinical research in order to implement new genomics technology. And Illumina is making very significant investments in newborn sequencing with the Guardian study, the Beacon study, and we're in conversations about the Sunshine Genetics.
And abroad. I mean, and remember, I mean, so, you know, what I like about this conversation so much is maybe it's just, you know, so many years being a funder of research. You know, you want to see a diverse portfolio of experiments. And so it's interesting, you know, hearing sort of what the logical progression you say about from a business point of view, you know, that's a hypothesis, and I bet it'll be successful, but once you do that experiment and nobody else is doing it, or maybe only one other group, and it's successful, then it follows. And there's some, you know, some similar experiments going on in other countries as well, but it's absolutely true. We need to be trying all these things. It's great to be, to surge ahead, to skate where the puck's going to be, and believe me, others will follow once they start to see the fruit that comes to bear from that.
Yeah, from my position, it's the first time that the genomics diagnostic industry has invested in what's called, I'll call loosely, clinical trials. In the same way, pharma industry has always borne the financial burden of not only the drug development, but the clinical trials to demonstrate efficacy, safety, et cetera. And diagnostics has never done that before. But now, because of the potential size of universal genome sequencing market, Illumina and GeneDx and others are investing. And Sarah, I'm not quite sure in your position at Quest what involvement in the strategic business planning or what your personal opinion would be for a Quest in terms of jumping in and getting involved in these.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're asking, because I've had so many thoughts as I've been listening, but some of the thoughts that I've had is, first of all, when you talked about you wouldn't be on a plane if the mechanic wasn't using the blueprint, and I was thinking how that really is, you know, so many times we've gone to the physician and the physician has asked about our family history, and that has been the traditional sort of like, you know, substitute for understanding your genetics is at least understanding your family history, but that's not available for everybody. It's also not nearly as predictive. So I've thought so much about that. We're primed for that because of using our family history. Now we just have a more precise tool, and we need to make sure that we're not scared of it. We need to make sure that we're using it. And then when I've thought about what you've said along, yes, of course, clinical trials should be happening in a state where they're really supporting genomics and genomic infrastructure so that the infants, the newborns, the children, we already know what the genetics are, so therefore we have the right population for those clinical trials, because as I understand it, the failure of many clinical trials is because the cohorts weren't defined appropriately, not because the clinical trial itself wasn't going to work, but because it wasn't studying the right population. So having a genomically defined population is going to result in us understanding exactly which drug should be used for which population, rather than having those studies fail because the cohort was not genomically defined. So, and then thinking about Quest's role in all of this, something that was said earlier today is, you know, Quest has CLIA laboratories across the country. It has multiple genetic CLIA laboratories across the country. So it's not usual for us to necessarily think, let's go help somebody else build a CLIA lab, but we will do that when it's the right thing to do, and that's why Quest partnered with FSU for your CLIA genomics facility, is because it is the right thing to do, and we're here to empower that.
Thanks. I'd like to come back to President McCullough and just talk, since I'm new to FSU and relatively new to state universities, the idea of academic industry partnerships, which I've always thought were really important to advance science most effectively, partly because of joint funding and that sort of thing. From FSU and State University, are there obstacles to that industry academic partnership or not? And just from your view, how can we promote those relationships for this particular area of focus?
Yes, that's a great question. So I've had experiences at multiple universities, and before I came here at 2 different universities, I was essentially in charge of those corporate partnerships. And I have to tell you that to develop those corporate partnerships here is very easy relative to some of the places that I've been, and because there's just fewer rules in terms of, and we don't worry. One of the things that stands in the way of corporate partnerships is that universities think, well, we have to protect to the death, our intellectual property, and we have to, because this could become a multi-billion-dollar idea, which is just a huge fallacy. I mean, very, very, very few, 1 in 50,000 of any invention makes $1. And really what we should be about is the transfer of the technology to people who can actually implement it. We can't do that at the university. We know what we do, and we do it well, but without those corporate partners, I don't think we can really translate it. So we're just thrilled that we can be able to do that so easily.
If I might add to that, the Sunshine Genetics Consortium is another phenomenal opportunity to foster that collaboration between our universities and the private sector. The whole Sunshine Genetics Newborn Screening Program truly is a public-private partnership where the state initially funded it. Florida State matched that contribution to help us get it off the ground. And we're going to continue to advocate for more funding from the state. But will be relying heavily on the private sector to bring this program statewide. And to use your analogy that you've been flying a lot, I had the same thought, actually. I've been flying a lot, too. And I was thinking about this on a plane, is that oftentimes the private industry looks to the government for support, whether it's regulatory support, for grants. We've kind of flipped that upside down, so the private sector tends to want to build these things, but not unless we have the government support. We've already provided that support. So we've built the runway, we've built the plane is fueled up, it's ready to take off and fly. The only limiting factor of how far we can fly that newborn screening plane is how much fuel we can put in that tank. That is the number one limiting factor. So we're working very hard to fly that plane nationwide.
Yeah. Some of you are aware I had the good fortune in my previous position at Geisinger Health System in Pennsylvania to partner with Regeneron Pharmaceuticals in a major, Geisinger is not a university, so it wouldn't be academic, but a nonprofit health organization and pharmaceutical company, where they invested more than $100 million over a 10-year period to allow us to build one of the largest biobanks in a healthcare system in the world and sequence 230,000 adults and show the clinical benefit of population genomic screening, similar to what we now have the opportunity to do in newborns. That was great. There were some things I would do differently in that was an exclusive relationship with one industry partner, and that came with some very challenging issues over data access, data sharing, et cetera, et cetera. We have an opportunity with Sunshine Genetics, and I know it would be good for Representative Anderson to comment about the number of different CEOs who have been in contact with you since this legislation started getting some press attention, because we are getting contacted by biopharma, genomics, digital health, cloud-based computing companies. Everybody wants to partner with Sunshine Genetics, and our attitude and ability so far has to have those discussions as non-exclusive partnerships, which I think will be a great advantage over my previous experience.
Well, I actually have not been able to keep up with the number of CEOs. I don't know if Corey keeps track of that. I hope you do, Corey, because we need to stay in touch with them. But it has been overwhelming. It has absolutely been overwhelming, and I can't. It's no exaggeration when I say that we have state leaders from states all across the country and executives from nearly every biotech and pharma company that is really floored by the accomplishments of the Florida Institute for Pediatric Rare Disease, and specifically the Sunshine Genetics Act. We've been really focused on getting that screening panel developed and rolled out and executed, which I think we're just a couple weeks away from starting to administer that program. And once that's live, we will be focusing very heavily on bringing in that private interest into the program.
I left out one great advantage we have in Florida at my beginning of my remarks, and that is that most people, when you talk about genetics research or genetic testing, in the population, a lot of people are concerned immediately about genetic privacy and genetic discrimination, and Eric alluded to the so-called ELSI program, or ethical, legal, social issues, which has been a big part of the Human Genome Project from the beginning. And Francis Collins, our original leader in the Human Genome Project at NIH, pushed through federal legislation called GINA, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, that covers you cannot use genetic information to discriminate in employment and health insurance. It did not cover long-term disability insurance. The state of Florida has additional legislative protection, legal protections that prevents discrimination with using genetic information for long-term disability. And I've been at national genetics meetings where the lawyers and ethicists leading the ELSI program talk about the national landscape. And they highlight Florida as the best state in the United States to protect your genetic information. So we've got some really interesting, unique advantages